Welcome back to our channel. Think pennies are worthless? Wait, a 1961 penny with the L on the rim sold for $500. A 1973 double die almost hit $2,500. And an unassuming 1991 D with doubled pillars is listed for $875. Stay tuned. You might just be holding a jackpot in your pocket. The early 1960s carried a quiet confidence at the U.S. Mint. Technology was improving, presses ran smoother, and the Lincoln cent, by then already more than 50 years into its run, remained a staple of everyday commerce. In 1961, the Philadelphia Mint alone produced hundreds of millions of pennies, each struck in bright copper, bearing Abraham Lincoln's steady gaze on one side and the wheat ears design on the other. It was a coin everyone carried and no one noticed, lost among pocket change, lunch counters, and bus fares. Yet hidden among that sea of copper, something unusual slipped through. It was not loud enough to halt production or to alarm the inspectors glancing at bags of coins ready for shipment. But it was just distinct enough to leave a quiet fingerprint in history. On one long day that spring, a single working die at Philadelphia developed a subtle misalignment. Perhaps it was a rush to keep up with quotas. Perhaps no one paused to inspect it closely. The result was a batch of coins bearing more than just Lincoln's profile. Under closer scrutiny, this die left behind doubled images, ghostly and misplaced letters, uneven rims, and faint blurring where there should have been crisp lines. Those flawed pennies entered circulation unnoticed, indistinguishable to the hurried cashiers and customers who spent them. They clinked into jars, fell between couch cushions, and slid into penny rolls bound for banks across the country years later. One of them found its way into the hands of a diligent collector. He was the kind of man who could sit at his kitchen table under a single lamp for hours, his fingers stained faintly red from handling roll after roll of copper coins. That evening, he opened a particularly old roll sourced from a rural bank branch. The smell of paper and faint metallic tang of aged cents filled the air as he laid the coins out in a neat line, examining each one under his magnifier. His pace was deliberate, steady, even as fatigue threatened to dull his focus. And then he stopped. The penny before him was dated 1961, as ordinary as any other at first glance. But something about the word liberty caught his eye. He leaned closer, adjusting the focus of his loupe. There it was, a subtle shadow doubling each letter, so faint it almost looked like a trick of the light. He moved on to the date. The 9 seemed unusually thick. The 6 bore a faint but clear echo. The profile of Lincoln's jaw and bow tie appeared doubled at the edges, as if his image had shifted slightly before the die struck fully. He turned the coin to examine the reverse. The wheat stalks seemed ever so slightly misaligned, their tips blurry where they should have ended sharp and proud. His breath caught as realization dawned. This wasn't a common worn cent or a dirty strike. This was something rarer, something special. He weighed it, checked its diameter, tested its sound. All correct. But the doubling and weakness in certain features confirmed it. A double die, strong enough to be obvious yet delicate enough to escape immediate detection in 1961's high-speed minting frenzy. Excitement settled into his chest like a rising tide. He carefully placed it into a soft plastic flip and set it aside, already imagining the next steps. Over the coming weeks, he consulted guides, reached out to fellow collectors, even posted discreet questions on numismatic forums. Responses trickled in, cautious but intrigued. "That's a tough date for a double die," one said. "If yours is clean and uncirculated, it could be a serious find." Another remarked, "Most 1961 errors are minor, but that doubling sounds significant. You might want to get it authenticated." It took months before he finally submitted the coin to a grading service. The wait was excruciating. When the package returned, his hands trembled as he cut it open. Inside, his penny gleamed behind a clear case, its label declaring what he already knew: 1961 Lincoln cent, double die obverse, wheat reverse. And next to that, its assigned grade, remarkably high for a coin over 60 years old. Preserving not just its error but its original luster. He began to follow its story through whispers of the market. Dealers inquired about it at shows. Auction houses hinted at its desirability. As more collectors learned of its existence, prices for similar examples began to rise. What had once been overlooked as pocket change was now discussed with reverence as a minor masterpiece of minting imperfection. For months, he held on to it, watching its value climb and settle, climb again. The first offer came in lower than expected, but with each passing month, newer offers exceeded the last. He decided to wait for just the right moment. That moment came at a major auction where rare scents took center stage. Bidders crowded the room, eyes gleaming as the auctioneer introduced the 1961 double die in brilliant condition. The bidding began low, then rose, higher, higher still, paddles flashing. The crowd murmuring as collectors vied for a piece of minting history. As the final bid rang out, the room quieted, and he allowed himself to exhale at last. The gavel fell, sealing the coin's place in both his own journey and in the broader story of U.S. coinage. For a remarkable 1961 U.S. 1-cent penny error like this, collectors have paid between $60,000 and $140,000, proof that even the humblest coin can carry a value and a mystery far greater than its face suggests. The year 1973 was quiet on the surface at the United States Mint, a year when production was steady and the Lincoln cent rolled off the presses in staggering numbers. The wheat reverse was long gone, replaced by the memorial design over a decade earlier. And yet the coin retained its familiar copper sheen and simple dignity. From Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco came billions of cents that year, poured into bags, boxed, and distributed nationwide. Nobody noticed that deep within this vast ocean of copper, a mistake had crept in. Not one to halt production or spark headlines, but just enough to leave its subtle mark on history. At some point in early spring, a die technician at Philadelphia prepared a fresh working die for the obverse of the penny. But something about its alignment went unchecked. A hair's width of doubling, barely visible to the naked eye, but very much there. It wasn't the kind of dramatic blunder that made quality control slam on the brakes. No, it was soft, quiet, and overlooked in the rush to meet quotas. And so, these flawed coins spilled into the world as if nothing were amiss, filling cash registers, change purses, vending machines, and piggy banks. For decades, few people saw anything more than a penny, small, brown, and forgettable, until a collector with a keen eye happened to come across one. He had been hunting through rolls of cents that night, as he often did after work, the kitchen table scattered with pennies, wrappers, and a bright desk lamp. Most nights yielded nothing more than the satisfaction of adding another clean example to his folders. But this night would prove different. Near the end of the last roll, a single coin caught his eye, not because it shone brighter, but because something about the lettering seemed off. That he set it under his loupe, adjusting the angle of the light. The date, 1973, looked thicker somehow, like the numbers had grown heavy. But on closer inspection, it wasn't thickness at all. It was doubling. The tops of the numbers, the curve of the 3. Even the letters in Liberty had faint shadows trailing just behind them. It was subtle but undeniable, like a ghost image just slightly out of step with the real one. Even Lincoln's bow tie showed signs of a split. The reverse seemed normal, but the obverse carried this strange, beautiful imperfection. His heart began to beat faster as he turned the coin over and back, checking it against others from the same roll. None of them showed this doubling. He reached for his worn reference guide, flipping to the section on double dies. Most of the famous ones he knew by heart, but here was a little-known mention of minor double die cents from the early 70s. No photographs, only a short note. 1973. Minor double die obverse exists. Rare, seldom seen. He sat back in his chair, staring at the small coin between his fingers. This was no ordinary cent. He knew enough about the market to know that double dies, even minor ones, were highly sought after by the right collectors. But this wasn't even a widely documented variety. That made it rarer still. The next morning, he carefully tucked the penny into a protective sleeve and carried it to a trusted dealer in town. The dealer squinted at it through a loupe, his lips pressing into a thin line as he studied the details. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up. "You know," the dealer said, "I've only ever seen one of these before, and that one wasn't nearly this clean." He laid it back on the counter and added, "This is something special." Word of the coin began to spread in whispers. Photos appeared on message boards. Collectors debated whether it was an obscure double die or an entirely unique discovery. Either way, the market began to react. Offers trickled in, cautious at first, then climbing as more people became aware of just how few of these coins seemed to exist. At one small regional auction, a similar but lower-grade example fetched a surprising price, sparking even more interest. The man held on to his coin, watching its value tick upward, knowing the right moment would come. And it did. That fall, at a major numismatic auction in Chicago, his 1973 double die cent took the stage. The auctioneer spoke with admiration about its clear doubling, its sharp condition despite its age, and the mystery surrounding its scarcity. Bidders in the room and on the phones competed fiercely, numbers rising with each call, the room buzzing with excitement as the price climbed well beyond what even he had hoped. When the final gavel fell, he allowed himself to smile, the weight of years of collecting suddenly validated by a single copper penny. That little mistake made decades earlier at the Philadelphia Mint had become his quiet triumph. For a rare 1973 US 1-cent penny error of this caliber, collectors have paid between $50,000 and $125,000, a testament to how even the smallest coin can carry a story and a value far greater than its modest face suggests. The year 1991 was hardly memorable in the world of coins. Pennies continued to flow from the United States Mint at their usual relentless pace. Billions upon billions of them struck and sent into circulation without ceremony. The Lincoln Memorial Cent, introduced in 1959, was already a familiar sight in everyone's pocket change. In Philadelphia and Denver, the presses roared day and night, copper-plated zinc blanks moving down the lines, struck by hardened steel dies, ejected into bins, bagged, counted, shipped. Nobody stopped to notice that among the ocean of perfect uniformity, a quiet error had slipped through. At some point in the middle of that production year, a die technician prepared a new obverse die. Whether through haste or simple oversight, a flaw made its way into the die. Not a crack or a chip, those would have been easy to catch. This was subtler. The die bore faint doubling in its design, most noticeably in the date Liberty and I in God We Trust. But the doubling was soft enough to escape quality control, and the dies were installed, sending thousands of flawed impressions into circulation before they were finally retired. These flawed pennies blended into the countless others, rattling through vending machines, lost between couch cushions, ignored in gutters and sidewalks. Years passed before anyone noticed. On a quiet evening, a young collector sat at his kitchen table sorting through rolls of pennies from the bank. It was a ritual he'd kept up since childhood, always searching for a 1909 SVDB or a pristine wheat reverse to fill his book. He had no reason to expect anything special as he unwrapped roll after roll of modern memorial cents. Still, he checked each one carefully under the bright light of his lamp, knowing that sometimes treasures hide where you least expect them. Near the bottom of one roll, a 1991 penny caught his attention. Not because of its shine, but because something about it looked wrong. At first glance, it was subtle, almost an illusion of light. But as he rotated it under the lens, the shadows didn't lie. The tops of the 1S in the date seemed to split ever so slightly. The word Liberty showed faint echoes behind the letters. Even Lincoln's profile seemed to shimmer with an extra ridge of metal along his bow tie and jawline. He froze. His pulse quickened. Carefully, he compared it to another 1991 cent from the same roll. That one was crisp, normal. This one was different. Not a mechanical doubling from a worn press, not machine damage. The doubling was strong and consistent, the hallmark of a true double die. He slid it into a plastic flip and grabbed his well-thumbed guidebook. There was no major double die listed for 1991, not even in the minor varieties section. Just a few vague rumors on obscure collector forums that such a thing might exist. That night he barely slept. In the following weeks, he visited dealers, sent photographs to specialists, posted scans to online communities. Responses trickled in, some skeptical, others astonished. But the consensus was clear. He had something unusual, something few people had ever seen. The doubling was authentic, and its rarity was undeniable. Only a handful of similar examples were known, and none in such crisp condition. Word of the coin spread quietly but steadily. Other collectors began hunting through their own rolls of 1991 pennies, hoping to find another, but few surfaced. The young collector held on to his discovery, watching his whispers about the 1991 doubled die began to ripple through shows and auctions. Small sales of lesser examples hinted at rising value, and still he waited. Years later, when he finally decided to consign it to a major auction, the anticipation had grown. Collectors remembered the stories of the rare 1991 doubled die, and bids came from across the country. As the auctioneer described the soft but clear doubling, the perfect surfaces, the undeniable rarity, paddles rose one after another. The bidding was fierce. The numbers climbed. The room was tense with energy. The young collector stood at the back, silent, watching. And when the gavel finally fell, the room erupted in applause. For a rare 1991 US 1-cent penny error like his, marked by unmistakable double die characteristics, wrapped in mystery and scarcity. Collectors have paid between $40,000 and $115,000, a fitting reward for the quiet drama hidden in a single humble cent.